a good place to start is to be reminded of God's unconditional love toward us. Mm. That's a very ideal kickstart for us. Now we are already being loved unconditionally from day zero, so to say, from time without beginning, by the divine. So we are already loved. So even if you don't love yourself, because many people really don't love themselves, unfortunately, and with this, I'm not saying in a narcissistic way, like I love me and I'm unique, but in a deep way, but really being grateful and appreciated ourselves, our existence. And that the fact that God is finding something lovable in us, and we need to learn that thing that he loves. So knowing ourselves to be loved, at least for me, especially in those moments where I need to reconnect with that principle of unconditional love, going to that foundation, I'm being loved unconditionally without doing any merit for that. It's just coming unconditionally. That's the very meaning of the word. That's so moving. That's so inspiring, so empowering for me to try to do something with that unconditional love that I received, and trying to extend that in other directions. So for me, that's a very powerful meditation, basically. I'm trying to get back to the idea of God's love, loving us unconditionally, and realizing how when we forget that, we so easily fall into this self-deprecation and self-loathing and guilt, excessive guilt, and basically unlovingness toward ourselves, and by extension probably toward everyone else. Because if you don't learn to love yourself in a healthy way, you won't be able to extend that to anyone else. So I will say it all begins by acknowledging how we are already loved by God. So that's the self-esteem we need, so to say. Again, self-esteem doesn't mean I'm incredible, better than anyone else. No, self-esteem is, wow, my own self is already loved unconditionally by the most important person. Wow, that's moving. That's incredible. That's humbling. And that's inspiring. So I have to do something with that now.
Yeah, and I think that perhaps this is still something that spiritual practitioners across the world are trying to come to grips with, and like update the old paradigms of this idea that like, well, self-love just leads to narcissism, like I think that's still pretty prevalent, unfortunately, in a lot of spiritual communities. And so that's what I love about your work so much, is you bring that attention to self-love as being a very nurturing, nourishing, like part of the equation that we can't like separate out. Like it's like you just said, we have to love ourselves. If we're not feeling love for ourselves, and we're not open to the divine loving us unconditionally and feeling that, then how in the world are we gonna, like in our interactions and relationships, how are we gonna flow love to them? It's impossible. So
yeah, and again, self-love is not narcissistic, because the self doesn't exist independent from God and everything else. So it will be narcissistic if we love ourselves, considering ourselves unique and completely isolated from the environment. But the fact that we are undeniably connected with God, loving ourselves means loving ourselves in connection with God. And in connection with God means in connection with the unconditional love he already has for us. So that's the real picture of self-love. No, it's not just I'm loving myself as a separated, isolated unit, and I'm just like putting myself on a pedestal of ego, and I love me and I love me.
yeah.
But self-love implies actually realizing what's the self and what's the nature of the self as interrelated with the divine and with everything else. In that context, loving all that we are in connection with everything else, because again, we are not separated beings. So in that case, self-love will be, again, humbling, inspiring, moving. It won't be a symptom of arrogance or things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.